History has a way of humbling us. Just when we think we've figured it all out, it surprises us all over again. Welcome to The Historians, a new series here on the History Shorts where I sit down with two of the brightest minds in their field for an informal, unscripted conversation about the biggest questions history asks of us. No panels, no debate, no agenda, just two people who've spent their careers living inside these questions, finally getting to talk shop together. For this first episode, I couldn't have asked for better company. Dr. Joseph J. Ellis is a Pulitzer Prize winning historian and the author of some of the most celebrated books ever written about the founding era, including Founding Brothers and American Sphinx. Dr. Carol Berkin is one of America's foremost historians of early America and the author of Revolutionary Mothers and A Brilliant Solution, among many others. She has spent her career making sure we remember not just the men in the room, but everyone else who was left out of it. I started the conversation with essentially one question. What do we know after all these years about the founding generation? What followed was one of the warmest, most honest conversations I've had on this podcast, touching on presentism, the danger of judging the past by today's standards, the remarkable Abigail Adams, and some of the forgotten figures of the founding era who deserve a lot more of our attention. They didn't always agree, but when they did disagree, they did it in a way great historians do, thoughtfully, generously, and with enormous respect for the complexity of the past. This is The Historians. Pull up a chair. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this one. Joe, Carol, thank you so much for joining me today. This truly is an honor.
I think it's an honor for both of us, but especially for me. And I just want to start by showing this is one of Carol's books. I'm not sure it's the one you've got. It's called Revolutionary Mothers, Women in the Struggle for American Independence. I assigned this book at Mount Holyoke for a course on the American Revolution. In the course, there were students from Mount Holyoke and about 3 students from Brown and one guy from Amherst, a very good guy, was doing his thesis with me on Madison. And what I want Carol to hear is that he at some point was asked which of the women in the book he found most interesting. And he said, the prostitutes.
Oh my God.
And from that point forward, everybody in the class was on this guy's head. I mean, like the poor guy.
The Harvard in the book, so
it's in the book. It's in there. Yeah, it is. But here's what I mean. Some people think that Carol Berkin is a woman's historian. I say that's not true. Carol Berkin is a historian of the American founding in much the same way that I am. And like her book on a brief history of the Constitutional Convention is the best ever done of that sort of thing. And that's really hard to do.
thank you.
But that I want to have an exchange with you somewhere in this dialogue to say, my reading of this book and your perception is that, yes, if you want to understand the American Revolution as it was seen, felt, experienced, you've got to cover women too. But it would be wrong to argue that women have an equivalent impact on the shape that the revolution took. Namely, they weren't allowed to vote. They weren't present when the Constitution was written. They weren't present when the Declaration of Independence was
I agree. No argument about that. And what
All
do you mean? Think how much better it would have been.
If only Abigail had been there, yeah.
Oh, heavens, no. Gibbet Sergeant Murray. Who wants Abigail there?
I feel like Abigail Adams is like the Wonder Woman. If you were to make superheroes of the founding generation, right? And if I ask anybody of my students about, what woman do you know from the founding?
No, She's
That's
the only one they know.
the only one.
And they misread, of course, they misread Remember the Ladies. They every student and far too many adults, right, who should know better, say, oh, she wanted the vote. I said, no, she didn't. She wanted married women's property rights. It was an economic appeal. And the exchange of letters is interesting. There weren't just 2 letters, there were 4. Everyone talks about what an equal marriage these 2 had. Oh, I'm not so sure. She writes to him, Remember the Ladies, and she's very explicitly asking for some autonomy from their husbands. And he writes back, ha, 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 ha. We know better. You know, this is very cute. We know better than to be ruled by the petticoat. And she writes back, John, I'm serious.
Right.
And he writes back, fundamentally, shut up.
Wow.
Well, I think we're going to have some disagreement on her. And by the way, I want to warn you, I talk to her every day. But my take is that Abigail is saying that she believes the values of the American Revolution not only require women to vote, but also that the end of patriarchy, that in other words, male supremacy is also one that, as far as she's concerned, and that she's far ahead of her time in that regard. But what do you do? What do you do if you're a woman like Abigail, who's got a daughter, by the way, and 3 sons, and you know that the values you believe to be the ones at the core of the revolution are never going to come into being during your lifetime or for a long time thereafter? In fact, we don't get to vote until 1920. So what do you do? Well, what Abigail does, and this is in keeping, I think, with your interpretation of her, she is a very, very good mother. She gives her education to her daughter, but it's home education. All of her boys are prepared for Harvard.
Yeah.
So she assumes that the most important thing that her daughter can do is decide who she marries, and she makes a bad choice about that.
I read all of the women writers of the era about what the role of women in a republic should be, because that was the question that the intellectuals asked. They knew that in the American Revolution, women had proven that, unlike the earlier centuries that argued women's brains were too weak to make moral judgments or rational judgments, that they had made rational judgments to support the revolution. And so they said, so now what do we do with them in a republic? And the women who wrote, Judith Sargent Murray, Susanna Rowson, Abigail Adams, never suggested the vote. All of them suggested education, that education was the critical variable that would prove that women were equal to men. Why did they not seem to be equal to men? Because they were not educated. And most of them argued that it was critically important that women be able to function independently if another crisis like the revolution occurred. What can women do to prepare themselves for another event that might throw the society into disorder? And several of them suggested that they learn trades, but I think that the vote, since many men couldn't vote, I don't think that seemed the reason. I think by 1848, women are demanding the vote is that white men have all been given the vote. There's no longer a property requirement.
Oh, you're right about that. Yeah.
And so now they feel as white women. What am I, chopped liver? You know what? The difference between a working class guy voting and an educated white woman not voting, I'm not painting this in a good light for the women, is how dare you let the riffraff men vote and not me vote. But that wasn't true in Abigail's era or in Judith Sargent Murray's era. And so their writings repeatedly talk about education and talk about the domination of men. I think in that regard, you can describe patriarchy, that the domination of men over their daughters and their wives has got to be revised. And that's really what Abigail wanted. And it's ironic because, of course, she was the one running the family farm. She was the one taking care of the family investments so he could go off and do other things. And here she was living a kind of independent life and calling for it for other women. In that regard, I have great respect for her. And also, I feel very strongly if married women had gotten property rights, which they didn't get until New York was the first state in 1848, if they had gotten the right to have a legal identity, to be able to buy and sell, to be able to will what they own to keep their wages, I think that would have advanced women far more than the vote. That's really, and that debate continues throughout American history. What is the most important thing? Is it women's economic independence? Is it their legal independence? Or is it political independence? And a lot of feminists in modern time have argued, who cares about the vote? What we care about is that we be able to rise in the corporation, or that we be able to start our own company, or that we, and so that I think is the continuation from the Revolutionary era. And they did achieve for the upper classes of women, they did achieve the education because young ladies' academies emerged in every single state, including Georgia.
And one of the first colleges was Mount Holyoke.
Yes. And so they got education, which turned out to be, as we all know, dangerous for the status quo.
Perhaps because I taught for 40 years at Mount Holyoke, where the students' immediate perception of Abigail is, why didn't she become a feminist? And I say the word didn't exist in the 18th century, and that she believed that her highest calling was to be a wife and a mother.
If they're going to make a film about in context, stop turning these people into people just like us, but in funny hats and dresses.
Yeah.
Their perception of the world and their perception of what a good society would be, and their capacity. The answer I always give my students when they say, why wasn't she a feminist? I answer, they don't have instant communication. A lot of families live on farms. There's no gathering place. There are a few cities, but not. That the world is completely different than it is today. And presentism is really the enemy of history.
Presentism is a mortal sin for historians.
Yes, I agree.
I'll give you an example of a point that you were making. Abigail, in one of her letters to John, says, she's frustrated with the fact that it takes almost 6 months for a letter to get from Boston to Paris.
Right.
So one of the students in class, a Smith student this time, says, why didn't she get on the internet?
Yeah, their lack of knowledge about when I talk about laundresses in the American Revolution, which is they are critical for the survival of the army. And students of mine say, did they have washing machines? I just,
Wow.
I think
When Washington's army is trapped in Long Island, I had one, this was a guy from Amherst say, why didn't Washington call in air support?
Yeah. Well,
The
our
birds.
very current president, said how clever Washington was to close down the airports during the American. I don't want to talk about
Oh my goodness gracious. I kind of want to return to that idea of you guys are called up and you're told Netflix or Hollywood, let's say, or Netflix, they're doing this new documentary about the revolutionary founding fathers and mothers era, the founding era. And you guys have the ability to be the main historians on the project. So with that in mind, you walk into that room full of executives and you say, first of all, what do you say?
understand them in their historical context.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with
Don't be a presentist.
the situation you just described is actually happening to me.
To both of us. I mean, the Declaration of Independence, I'm retired.
Yeah.
And the Declaration of Independence celebration, not counting the cage fight, has sucked to me. Everybody is making a documentary. Everybody wants you to give a talk. Everybody, I mean, we're very much in demand at the moment. Thank goodness I won't be around for the celebration of the Constitution because I don't think I could stand it. But I think both of us would say, I don't want to speak for, but that do not be presentist.
Right.
Do not. You must understand the 18th century. And of course, nobody wants to bother to do that. With my students, I say, before we even talk about the revolution, let's talk about what life was like in the 18th century. Let's talk about what they didn't have that we have today. Let's talk about their sense of how long people lived. Let's say, nobody's planning for their retirement in the 17th and 18th century. And they get impatient. They just want to. But human nature is the same, they say. And I say, no, it's not. And so I think that would be the thing I would stress. And I think all good historians would stress, don't be presentist.
I agree with you. My experience, I talk these four people that are they say they're making this film. All of them have incredible credentials. Three of them won big prizes and stuff. When you tell them what Carol just said, they don't understand what you're saying. They can't make the distinction between then and now.
Yeah.
And I say, until you can occupy then, until you can go back to the past and recover their mentality, you're not doing history. And then they say, I don't care.
Yeah.
That's not my goal. My goal is to make a film that is very interesting and to modern. One of the women, by the way, one of the women that I told them they should study and to make a major character is what's her name?
Catherine Green.
Yeah. Catherine Green. Yeah.
Green, the first Bloomingdale's lady.
Yeah.
Every time she went to the winter camp, she insisted on a completely new wardrobe.
Right.
She didn't want Mrs. Washington to see her in the same dress she'd worn.
Oh, wow.
Or Nathaniel Greene wasn't rich. And he would say, you can just picture the conversation. Couldn't you please wear? Oh, I could never dream of doing. So in my mind, I always thought of her as the first Bloomingdale's lady.
Yeah, you could do some great stuff with her at, she's the men, what's the name of it, the place they're staying that winter. She is out there. Men love her, women hate her. But at the end of her life, when her husband dies early, she inherits this island with slaves on it. And she asks someone to come down from Yale to teach her students. And I forget his name, but it's because I forget everybody's name. He invents.
It's Eli Whitney, isn't it?
Eli Whitney. and
Yeah.
Eli Whitney
He invented it.
invent together. And she never makes any money off of it, but
Absolutely.
So after all of these years that you guys have spent with the founding generation, do any of these people or figures or even the time period still surprise you? Or do you feel like for the most part, I mean, it's an ongoing process forever, but do you feel like for the most part, you kind of have them figured out?
I, from the start, operated on the assumption that all of these people were ordinary human beings. They were not gods. They were, and they had their flaws.
Boy, did they.
And that was at the time a somewhat radical view, but that I think I was right about that. And it's interesting that in emerging world powers often seem to require mythical heroes. Rome had Romulus and Remus. Greece had what's his name anyway, and Great Britain has King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, and so
Ireland has St. Patrick.
St. Patrick.
Ireland has St.
well, but they seem to need, and one of the reasons that Adams has no monument on the wall, or excuse me, on the tidal basin, is that he doesn't fit. He's too obviously imperfect and honest, and I testified before some subcommittee of the Congress at one point in time, arguing for a Adams Memorial, and I said it should be placed on the tidal basin close enough to the Jefferson Memorial that on days they can casting shadows across each other's facades.
Yeah.
And
I wrote for the National Constitution Center last year short 1,400-word bios of all the men who attended the Constitutional Convention and everyone who was in the Declaration of Independence, Continental Congress. And let me tell you, everybody winds up talking about Jefferson, Madison, Ben Franklin, those guys. But here were all these other men. And some of them, the stories, I can't tell you how many were alcoholics, how they had illegitimate children. Let me just give one example. Robert Morris, the financial wizard of the Revolution, he was illegitimate. He was born in England, and he was illegitimate. But he and his father came to America, where Robert Morris promptly had an illegitimate daughter, which is, okay. But his father had an illegitimate son with the same woman.
Oh, my goodness.
And I'm sitting there going, whoa. It is, you find out idiosyncrasies about so many of these people that you can't help but know. As you've said, you can't help but know they were ordinary people. The number of men who wound up in jail for what we would call today Ponzi schemes, or for a debt, or for the number of people who cheated on their wives, and I don't just mean with slaves. It's just, they're just guys. And that's what makes, I always say when I give the talk on on the Constitutional Convention, I start with every country has to have a birth myth, but I end with, are they superheroes? No.
right.
That's what makes them admirable. They managed to produce the Constitution, and they were really a group of mere mortals. So I think if we elevate them to the level of, superheroes, then so what? When I tell my students, when Superman puts his arm out and stops a speeding bullet, big deal, he's Superman. But when Madison, Hamilton, Franklin, Button, Gwinnett, all kinds of people even managed to write the Constitution, That's an achievement.
It stands out. Yeah. Which kind of goes to like my third question, because I feel like history tends to either worship these guys or cancel them, right? We live in these polar
Mhm.
opposites in our society. What do you guys think would be the healthier way for us Americans to think about these people instead of jumping to each extreme of like Washington God versus, oh, let's cancel because he had slaves, right? Like, what would be the healthiest way for us as Americans and perhaps a new generation of students, young people, to
Yeah,
look at our founding
to
generation?
understand them in their own context and to see them as complex human beings.
Mm.
That asks a lot of people.
Well, they happened to come of age during a time when we faced what will, I think, be the greatest crisis in American history. And the crisis made them. That is to say, they had no choice. They had to go one way or the other. And when they voted, this is on the 2nd of July, on a Virginia proposal calling for these colonies are and have every right to be independent states. The delegate from Virginia, I'm forgetting names again, goes over to the delegate from Massachusetts and says, I'm lucky because I'm fat.
Yes,
And you're very unlucky because you're thin. And that means that when they come and hang us, I'll die quickly.
he's talking to
Elbridge Gerry, after him
versus
gerrymandering us. You got it. You got it. And it's a measure of how they were forced to make a decision about American independence at a time when it was very unclear that we would successfully win independence. How could a country of 13 separate colonies that have no history of cooperating defeat the dominant military and economic power in the world? And Washington himself said at the end of the war, anybody who writes an honest account of the American Revolution, of the American War, will be accused of writing fiction.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that good historians, that's their effort to place these people in their moment in time and to understand that. I mean, most of my students think, oh, they made a revolution and then they won a war and then they were fine. I mean, they don't realize the tension that was involved in that Continental Congress as men grappled with, and also families divided. I believe that this was as much more of a civil war than the 19th century Civil War. The Civil War in the 19th century was North against South, but the Civil War in the American Revolution was brother against brother, neighbor against neighbor. In the Quincy family, you have loyalists, you have revolutionaries, brothers of one another. You have sisters who Dorothy Quincy marries John Hancock, and Esther Quincy marries one of the leading loyalists, Jonathan Sewall. So you've got divisions in every town and city, in every area. In South Carolina and Georgia, it's a civil war going on between backcountry and planter class. It's such a bloody and complex and difficult war that my students, undergraduates, I admit my graduate students know better, but my undergraduates think, they were just guys in three-corner hats with muskets and everything worked out just great. and to convey to them the anxiety when Franklin says we must all hang together or we will all hang separately. They weren't kidding.
Mm-hmm.
These men, and in fact, in many cases, especially in the South, with the two Southern campaigns, a lot of the men who signed the Declaration of Independence had their homes burned. They lost their property. They were imprisoned. They did suffer as a result of taking that stand. So you don't have to turn them into superheroes to see the kind of nobility that is involved in finally saying, this is how I'm going to cast my lot.
Mhm.
Because before the French came into the war, we were going to lose it. You know?
I want to just add that my list of founders is 6 people, but I've added a 7th recently. A guy who deserves to be on the top I'm in the top group is John Jay. The reason he's not there is because,
Boring.
well,
In comparison,
well,
I guess.
well, the reason is that a professor at Columbia, who's now no longer with us, hoarded his papers. And his papers haven't been published. They're in the process of being
You're
published.
talking about my advisor. Be careful.
All right. Well,
You guys are funny.
yeah, and but I think he was the most competent. And in certain key moments, like the drafting of the peace agreement, he's the one who got the Mississippi to be the border. He's the guy that talked Washington into coming to go to the Constitutional Convention.
Absolutely.
And when Washington was elected president, the first person he went to was Jay and say, "What position on my cabinet do you want?"
And he said,
Jay said, "I want to be as Chief Justice." And Adams, of all people, said that he thought Jay was the right person to inherit the presidency from Washington, which of course is, what he was going to do. So that Jay also was married to a gorgeous woman in New York, went on to have a life after his, which it's not recorded yet though. I'm just saying that on the Ellis list, I put Jay on there after the first 6. And each of them has different qualities. Washington's the greatest leader. Franklin is the most, the wisest. I think Hamilton's the smartest. He would have got the highest score on the SATs.
my guy.
Go down the list like that. And
Who's the hothead, do you think? Who's like the guy that's like in the room and everyone's like, oh,
Elbridge
he's going to blow
Gerry.
his top?
Elbridge Gerry. Did you know that he is one of the funniest characters in? He had no friends except John Adams.
Mhm.
Nobody liked him. I tell my audiences, he was the Ted Cruz of the 18th century. When they were discussing the Bill of Rights, he was not a Federalist. He wanted the Constitution's powers eviscerated. All the amendments that were proposed by the Anti-Federalists were to diminish the power of the federal government. And so he wanted all those amendments to be included in Madison. Madison was a brilliant strategist. And so he wrote the Bill of Rights in order to ensure that none of those things would be in it.
Mhm.
And Elbridge Gerry understood what was happening, and he stood up in the House of Representatives. He stood up and gave these long and very clever, very, very sly. And finally, if you read the letters of the other men in the Congress, they're saying things like, we could have been finished with this 5 weeks ago if Elbridge Gerry would sit down and shut up. And that's how they felt about him forever. And then what does Adams do? Because Adams has very few friends once he's president. He was a terrible president, but once he was president, he accepted all of Hamilton's guys as his cabinet. So he sends representatives to France to negotiate this very complicated détente with the French. Then he sends James Marshall, who had no experience yet. He doesn't become the Chief Justice.
Greatest Chief Justice in American history.
Yeah. And he sends Charles Pinckney, and he sends Elbridge Gerry. And people say to him, are you out of your frigging mind? I mean, people come into Adams' office and they say, no, he'll disrupt everything. And Adams says, no, I had a long talk with him. And I explained to him he had to cooperate with the 2 other commissioners, and he said he would. Well, of course, as soon as they get to France, he drives a wedge between them. He tries to negotiate all by himself. He destroys the commission. And when he comes home, so people in Massachusetts threw stones at his carriage. They were so mad at him.
Well, eventually he got his comeuppance because
Yes,
after what is named after him?
yes, gerrymandering.
Gerrymandering. That's what he's most famous for.
But it's the only thing really most people know. He is the most impossible, as I'm right, because I did this book on the Bill of Rights. And as I'm reading all of the stuff and the discussions in the Congress, I'm sitting there thinking, sit down and shut up, Gary. You know, I think he was the most colorful, one of the most colorful people in the government, not counting a guy named, I can't remember Jackson's first name, who challenged everyone to a gunfight. I mean, it's like the original cowboy. But Gary, everybody, no one had a good thing to say about him except John Adams.
What do you guys think about? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I always, think of my students ask this question. Well, John Quincy was around when this is happening. I'm like, yes, but he's young. But there's always the conversation. Well, sometimes I hear like he's the last, or he might be the last of the founding generation. When does the founding generation end? Like, would you say, were the last members? I mean, Madison, Monroe is the youngest, I guess.
Jefferson and Adams. That's the great moment. And is it 1826?
The anniversary, the July. Yep.
Them die.
Yeah, it's a miracle. I mean, it's, in fact, I think a mathematician at Yale said that there was one chance in 600 million that would occur. And in fact, up until then, there was still some confusion about what the date to celebrate the anniversary of independence was, because they had voted on Adams writes to Abigail on July 3rd and says, yesterday, the 2nd, will be the day we recognize it, because that's the day they voted on the Virginia policy, the thing about that we wish to declare our independence of Great Britain. Adams later goes on to claim, because he's jealous of the fact that Jefferson gets all the credit because he drafts the Declaration. And he says, first of all, they asked Franklin to do it. Franklin said he never does anything that is going to be edited by a committee. Then they asked Adams.
Yeah.
And Adams said, I shouldn't do it because I have a bad reputation inside.
But he likes me, he says.
Well, it's because they don't like him because he's pushing them towards independence faster than they want to go. And at any rate, what was I?
Jefferson, you're saying when Jefferson, the days when we celebrate.
Oh yeah. That the fact that Jefferson and Adams die on the exact 50th anniversary to the day clarifies for all time. Yes, the 4th is the day. God spoke essentially on that day. And from that point forward, our day of celebration is unquestionably the correct day.
And a lot of the men didn't sign on July 4th. Some of them didn't sign until August.
None of them signed on the 4th. None.
Yeah, it's
So,
we're celebrating the wrong day.
1976 gets that wrong for what is it? For purposes of a fictional view of the revolution. But most people signed it on August 2nd. There were people signing it in September.
Yeah.
And there's some people who signed it last and put their names first. So you can't tell that they were, where they were. At any rate,
I just thought of something.
One of the things I'm taking for this is that Carol and I need to get together someplace and teach a course together.
I'm retired. I'm
retired too. I'm retired. I haven't taught in 20 years, and I miss it though. I mean, I think that teaching is a social activity and writing is a solitary activity.
Yes, exactly. It's true, and that's why after I did a book on the Federalist era, the 1790s, And then I quit. And people say, oh, what are you going to write? I said, no, I'm done. I spent so many years alone in an archive and I loved it, but away from my children who ate a lot of Chinese food and pizza. And I don't want to do that again. I want to spend time with my grandchildren. I want to laze around and do nothing and visit things. Well, I'm not
Well,
teaching.
but
I'm not writing.
Carol, we don't have to do a real course. We can do a Zoom course, and
That's
you know, and the name of the case is arguing about the creation of America. To what extent do we have a responsibility at this moment in American history to say that it is extremely awkward that in the year we celebrate the anniversary of American independence, the occupant of the White House thinks he's the second coming of George III, because I'm 82 years old now.
I'm older than you. I'll be 84.
Okay, well, we're in the same boat, though. And I would argue that we need a constitutional amendment making it prohibitive. Any American occupying the White House cannot occupy it past the age of 75.
I would make it lower.
Would you?
I agree.
70?
Yes, 70.
All right, I'll go with you.
Go to 72.
There we go.
I want to ask you one kind of, I guess, fun question. You're like the legends, but you both said this, that you're retired. What does a retired historian do? Do you ever quit? Or is your mind always looking at the world in a certain way?
Let me go first and then be quick, and so she can follow me here. Me, as I say, half of my identity was as a teacher and half as a writer. I'm no longer teaching. I miss that. I don't miss grading papers, but I work 4 to 5 hours a day on the next thing. I published a book that came out not long ago, and it's doing reasonably well. And I've got another project going called Memories, Lost Stories from the American Founding. If I didn't have those 4 to 6 hours a day that I'm working, my mind would have shriveled to nothing. Some would say it already has, but that I maintain an identity as a writer. And when I wrote the last book called The Great Contradiction, when I began it, I asked myself, Joe, can you still do it? It means tell a story. And I think the verdict is yes. And so as long as I can do that, I'm going to keep doing it. And I stay alive, and I'm up here with 2 dogs and on top of a mountain, and it's a good life. But if I didn't have that side of me, I would shrivel up and die.
I am writing a memoir of growing up Jewish and poor in Mobile, Alabama, not for publication, for my children and my grandchildren, because my children know intellectually my story, but emotionally they think I was born on the Upper West Side with an American Express card. They can't understand what life was. And I'm having the most fun writing it because you remember things that you had forgot, that are buried so deep. And I don't mean because they're emotionally I remember events from when I was 4 years old. I remember, it's so glorious, and I can write it in what is really not my academic style. I write it very tongue-in-cheek, and I love it. But other than that, I read mystery novels. I read detective stories. I go to lunch with friends, and I fell over my grandchildren. As I said, I do not want to, and I write talks, I give talks, and stuff like that. But I don't want to bury myself again, because once I start writing history, you could blow up the world around me and I wouldn't notice. And
Carol, when you wrote history, who did you think you were writing for?
me, I was trying to puzzle out.
Mm-hmm.
I have an ex-husband who said the truest thing ever said about. He said, "You're insufficiently socialized into the profession." I didn't really care about reviews. I didn't really care whether people. I wanted to figure out what was going on at the Constitutional Convention. I wanted to figure out why Madison wrote the Bill of Rights. I wanted it was and I learned my answer by writing. As I wrote, the Bill of Rights book, the book, last book I wrote about the federal era. What the book was about came to me as I wrote the last chapter. And I called up my editor and I said, "This book is about the rise of a nationalist identity and national identity. It's not about the administrations. It's about the way in which people came to think of themselves, not just as Virginians and not just as Georgians, but as Americans." And it came to me in the writing. And so mostly that's what I think about. That's who my audience is in a bizarre way.
All right. My audience is not other historians. My audience, I mean, if I have a lot of endnotes, as do you, and so a historian wants to read that and it's for him. But I'm writing for the kind of students I taught. Namely, they were smart, they were interested in American history, and they didn't know anything. And that's the audience for me. And I think that both of us have readerships far beyond the academy.
Oh, absolutely. We both write trade books.
Mhm.
After my dissertation, I said, I don't want to just write for 4 other people.
Right.
I wanna
For
write-
other people.
Well, you know, we
Yeah.
could all meet in a phone booth.
Yeah.
And I said, I want to write
For the people.
for my brother, who is
Yeah.
an intelligent person who majored in business administration, who's interested in history. And Joe, you've made a major contribution in that regard. And I made a little one in that regard, but I believe that is our audience.
Mhm.
Bigger audience is the people. And I get such a kick when someone comes up to me and says, "A teacher, I read your book. I'm going to try to put it in my, my classroom. That was great." And I think, terrific. That's who I'm aiming for. It's not my colleagues in the profession.
Yeah, I remember when I was on a book tour and a young man came up and he had been assigned Founding Brothers in this course in California. And he said, "This paragraph here," and he pointed it out, and he said, "It must be great to be able to just sit down and write a paragraph like that." And I said, "Young man, that took 3 weeks."
Oh, guys, you know what's funny? I want to end it with this. I first read your books while I was creating a lesson plan when I still taught high school. And I saw the textbook and I'm like, this isn't doing it justice. So I found your books. I had your books. I made copies of certain pages and I said to my students, read this. And what they got really excited about, I forgot what documentary, but you guys were both the talking heads on one documentary. This is 20 something years ago. And
when I had long hair,
yeah, it was so long ago. And I remember when both of you popped up on there, my students were so excited. You would have thought you guys were like, Mel Gibson or or like Meryl Streep. They're like, "We know them. That's the one we know." And I'm like, "Yes, this is a documentary." And they were so excited.
You want to hear a funny thing? Neither of my children have ever watched any of the many documentaries I've been in. They've never read any of my books. And I wanted to know why. And my son said, "We wanted to know you just as our mom." But friends of his at his school would come up to him and say, "I saw your mom on TV." Wasn't she great? And my son said, I didn't watch her. The only time he ever thought of watching, I did a show called The History of Sex. And serious
You
study
watched it.
the way in which he was 13 years old. He comes into the living room with a notepad and a pen.
Oh, no.
And I said, Matt, it's not a how-to documentary. And he said, in that case, and he left. That was as close as he ever came. But I thought it was pretty telling that they wanted to know me in a particular way. Now they're married, they have kids, and now they read my books. But they didn't want to when they were growing up. So I was not a prophet in my own town, in my own country.
And Joe, does your family read your books?
Yeah. I mean, my wife stopped reading them because she's from Mississippi and she's a steel magnolia, and she would just Jackson. And
many times.
yeah, and like she would disagree. If I said either, she'd say either. If I said neither, she said neither. And so I said, from now on, I'm not going to ask you to read them. And she said, great. My three sons have read them, but they all, they like the youngest son came in when I was writing something, and he said, "What are you doing, Dad?" And I said, "I'm writing a book." And he said, "I can do that better than you can." He was 5 years old.
Oh, wow.
I produce children who have an elevated sense of their own significance, and one of them two of them went to Brown, and I believe if you go to Brown after graduation, they take all the graduates together and make them promise to save the world and get careers in which that's what they think they're doing, and but I'm happy anyway.
This was awesome, guys. I just want to say, thank you so much for taking the time. I really am, in a presence of historical royalty here. So,
John.
Thank you so very much for taking the time.
I tell you, we can make some money, Carol. Like we can make some money and leave it to our heirs.
Oh gosh!
Thank you for inviting us. I know we did not follow your
this was perfect.
Sets of questions, but there's a lesson there for you. Historians like to talk.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
I've interviewed a lot of historians on this podcast, but I have to be honest, I wasn't entirely sure what would happen when I put two of them in the same room together without much of a script or a plan. What did happen was this: nearly 1 hour of conversation that felt less like a podcast and more like sitting in on the last class of the semester. The one where the professor finally stops following the syllabus and just talks. The thing that stayed with me the most was not a debate or a disagreement. It was actually the thing that they both agreed on the most: that presentism is the enemy of understanding history. That judging the founders by today's standards is not only unfair, but it's bad history. And that the most radical thing you can do as a historian is simply to try to understand people as they actually were: flawed, frightened, ordinary human beings who somehow managed to do something extraordinary. Carol said it best: they were not superheroes. And that's exactly what makes them so admirable. I want to thank Dr. Joseph J. Ellis and Dr. Carol Berkin for being the first guests on The Historians. If this conversation is any indication of what this series can be, I think we're just getting started. Remember, you can always watch these conversations on our YouTube channel or listen to them wherever you get your podcasts. So I guess, pull up a chair. The historians are talking.